Welcome to a new episode on the Technomora channel. We really hope you will enjoy watching it and invite you to tell us what you think of it by leaving your reactions below the video. And now, please allow me to present your host, Technomora.
Thank you, Julie. So, dear viewers, tonight we're going to work on a Sony TA-70 amplifier from the mid-70s. We're in the mid-1970s, and it is an original Sony, although at the back it says made in Korea. This, however, is Japanese design, but it was built in Korea. Now, it's a 30 watt amplifier. It's a bit unclear whether the service manual refers to 30 watt per channel or 30 watt in total, but I'm sure as we move along we'll find out. Now, it's a neat but sober little amplifier. It has, let's say, all the usual you would find on a normal amplifier, namely bass, treble, balance and volume, which is great. We also have a speaker switch, which allows you to, in fact, connect up to 4 speakers to it, and you can switch between the 2, say, front speakers and the 2 back speakers, which is a bit unusual. I don't see why somebody would do that, but alright, it's there. And then it has an auxiliary input switch, a tuner input switch, and a phono input switch, as well as a headphone output. Alright, so then it has the monitor switch, which allows you to monitor what's coming from the source. So be it either, let's say, a tape recorder, a tuner, and a record player, or what's coming from, or going rather, to the tape, rather. Then you have a stereo mono switch, and then you have filters, and you have what you could call a very crude equalizer. Alright, so you either have something which cuts out the high tones, so, and it's called high filter, or you have an infernal invention, in my opinion, which is the loudness button, alright, which amplifies the bass tones, so that you get that booming sound every time, say, drums or bass guitar are played. I call it infernal because loudness is the bane of my existence, since I have a few neighbors who enjoy playing their amplifiers with loudness full on, and preferably late at night. Anyway, so that's my gripe for the day. Anyway, so then we have what we would call the classic 70s Sony switch with the little stubby button which flicks up and down. And yeah, that's it for the front. So this is the back. So right from the start, you have the 4 speaker outputs, 2 for the front and 2 for the back speakers. So they go in pairs from left to right. Okay, so right speaker, left speaker. let's say front speakers and right and left back speakers. It's a bit unusual why they put the right speaker on the left and the left speaker on the right, but I guess maybe that's a remnant of the fact that Japanese people read everything from right to left, right? So, yeah. In any case, the right speaker is on the left and the left speaker is on the right. You also have a AC power switch, which switches between say 220 and 110, or 240 and 120, and then you also have the input. Okay, so you have the record out, so these two would go to the record inputs of your tape recorder or your cassette recorder. These two, on the other hand, would go to your tape recorder output, alright, or cassette output. This is the auxiliary input, the tuner input, left and right, and the record player, left and right, and the switch between magnetic and ceramic. As some of you may know, some record players, mainly I'd say the older ones, had a ceramic needle and head, pickup head. The more recent record players have a magnetic needle and pickup head. Alright? Well, actually just the pickup head. The needle was always diamond. And then it has two throughputs of AC power. Alright? So, and like it says, unswitched 300 watts. Meaning that you can hook up, say, a tuner and a tape deck to these outlets here without having to provide for an ugly breakout extension cord, yeah, but maximum 300 watts per connector. Now obviously, as you notice, these are American AC connectors, non-polarized, whereas this actual amplifier I imported from the UK. Yeah? So that's a bit peculiar, I would say, but I'm guessing that these amplifiers were built for the world market and not specifically for the US or Europe. Alright, I unscrewed all the feet and all the screws on the periphery except this one. So let's go ahead and unscrew this one. There you go. And you'll notice that I'm keeping all the parts that I release in a little ordering box like that. Alright, it's these boxes that you get often get for free when you buy parts, say on Amazon or eBay or Alibaba or wherever, are very handy to keep small parts from getting lost. Yeah, so everything is released. I should be able to slide out the amplifier. Alright, to release the amplifier took me a little bit more work than I thought. I had to slide it out of its case. Okay, and it's a tight fit. So yeah, you really need to tug on it. But But I found that if you put it on its back end, so this end, and vertical like this, alright, you can slide off the case, gently pulling it upwards. Alright, so let's have a look on its insides. And as far as I can tell, it all looks original. It's dirty, of course, but it doesn't look like it's been tampered with. So keep in mind, the seller who sold me this amplifier didn't particularly tell me whether the amplifier worked or not. So the state of the amplifier is unknown to me at this stage. But I'll say this, it looks really neat and cleanly assembled. I would say typical the Sony quality, even back then. So what I suggest I do first is replace all the electrolytics first. Yeah, I'll resist the temptation of switching the amplifier on in its actual state. And I'll replace all the electrolytics inside of it. To release the front end of the amplifier, you need to release quite a few screws all around the periphery of the front panel, except the screws which hold in the switches, and the switch I should say, the pilot lamp and the headphone connector. Alright, so these you should not unscrew. Keep in mind though that most screws are held in place with some glue. Alright, so if you're going to release the screws, do it gently and do it with the proper Phillips head screwdriver, okay, so as not to destroy the screws. Also, keep in mind there's one screw sneakily hidden right here, okay, next to this button here. So once you've got undone all the screws on the periphery of the front, there are 3 screws to release from the top, so one here and 2 here, so one here and there. Alright, so I slid off the metal front end of the amplifier, and carefully, because you don't want to scratch or damage the buttons. Alright, and once you did that, you can actually lift the whole board, the whole PCB, to which the preamp and all the buttons and potentiometers are attached, which of course makes it a little easier for me now to replace all the capacitors in here, which is something that we'll start doing around about now. But first I'm going to do all the capacitors, which are easy to reach, namely here on the end stage of the amplifier, and possibly also on the power supply right here. There you go. Alright, I hooked up the quote-unquote good capacitor, the one which didn't leak, to my universal component measurement apparatus. And there you go. The capacitor is rated for 470 microfarad 35 volts, and it's more than 10% off its rated value, as you can tell. It measures 553 microfarad. The ESR is relatively low, but you know, its rated value is seriously off. Well, I mean more than 10%. So, you know, it's not worth it to keep the original electrolytics, because if you do, you risk damaging the equipment in which they are built in. Because remember, electrolytics are called electrolytics because there is an electrolyte, there is a chemical inside of them, and that chemical over the years turns bad. Alright, and these electrolytics are 50 years old, because these are the ones that were originally installed at the factory. Okay, so like I said, unless you want to destroy your amplifier in this case, well then don't replace them. But really, like I said, if it's something near and dear to you, then you know, just replace the electrolytics. It costs you at most $1 or two if they are big, and just a few cents if they are small. I'm showing you the main filter capacitor upside down, okay? And I suddenly realize I have a problem. If I am to replace that capacitor, I don't immediately see how I can mount the power supply board back in place, because it's counting, the montage of it is resting on the fact that the filter capacitor has a certain height and a certain width. You know, I think you can see it, but it has, let's say, 1.5 inches diameter. Yeah, and it's about 2 inches high, so 50 millimeter high, and about 40 millimeter in, or maybe even 50 millimeter in diameter. Yeah, and the replacement capacitor is far, far, far smaller. I did find a solution to replace the original 2200 microfarad 50 volts capacitor by an alternative, which is recycling an old pillbox I had, alright, and gutting it, and installing a brand new 2200 microfarad 50 volt capacitor inside of it. And then, like this, mounting it inside the bracket which held the original capacitor. Basically, I used a few pieces of foam to center the pillbox inside the bracket, alright, and then I filled up the gaps with hot glue. And it worked out fine. You know, it has the exact same height as the original capacitor, if not the same diameter. But the diameter in this case is really, well, not very relevant. In any case, yes, it is a valid alternative. I just used some black insulation tape to recreate, let's say partially, the looks of the original electrolytic can, right? Nothing more. I mean, the whole thing is plastic, really, so it insulates terrifically well. Also, I took the opportunity to clean up the mess of wires that was soldered to the negative pole of the capacitor, and I clean it up by installing a little connector block instead, which I soldered to a little copper strip, which in turn I soldered to the same spot where all the wires were soldered to originally. And then I just used some connector pins which I soldered to the wires and then installed into the connector block. Some of you might wonder why I installed it underneath the print board and not on top of it as they were originally installed. Well, the reason is that the space above the PCBs is limited inside the cabinet. Alright, so I can't build up too much in height. And also I didn't want to drill into the print board, so I wanted to preserve it as original as possible. So, I mean, the changes I made are reversible. So anybody else at a later date who owns this amplifier can still restore it to its original looks if he or she would want to do so. Alright, I gave the chassis of the Sony TA-70 a cleaning, and to do the cleaning I used a combination of alcohol, denatured alcohol, degreaser, and WD-40. So I used these three products, and don't worry, I'm not sponsored by either. But there you go. I used a combination of those three. Now keep in mind, and especially so for the degreaser and W40, you know, those products are not, I repeat, not lubricants, okay? So if you're going to clean something like, say, a switch or a potentiometer like the ones you see here, yeah, you, after cleaning them, especially with a degreaser or a contact cleaner or even with W40, you need to grease them. And for greasing those kind of small mechanics, I use a silicone oil. Alright, so and I use only the tiniest of amounts of silicone oil, and I obviously only grease the parts that really move, like the axles of the potentiometers, okay, or the spring mechanisms of the buttons. All the electrolytics are brand new. Alright, so yeah, all the electrolytics have been replaced, top board and underneath, and all the internal internals are cleaned, so I need to do one more thing, which is to fire the amplifier up and see whether it works, of course, and whether it works correctly. So let me do just that. Alright, according to the schematic of the Sony TA-70, the power supply should output 43 volts DC. You see it there, 43 volts. So since this is the first time I'm going to fire it up, and I'm not entirely sure that the voltage selector is set correctly and works correctly, I'm going to fire the amplifier up on my variac, and I'm going to slowly ramp up the AC voltage. Alright, so I'm going to start at around 80 volts AC. Now, if the volt selector of the AC is set incorrectly, then I should reach 43 volts at 110 volts AC. Alright? If the AC switch is set correctly and works correctly, I should get 43 volts DC at 220 volts, or around about. So, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to switch on the amplifier by flicking the switch up, and then monitor the voltage on the output of the power supply. And in fact, I'm monitoring the voltage right on the leads of the 2200 microfarad main filter capacitor. Alright, so, well, here we go. Let's hope nothing will blow up. There you go. Okay, nothing blew up. Okay. And the power supply is outputting 15.5 volts DC, or thereabouts. Okay, so let's go up to 110. Okay, 115 volts AC, and it's still not consuming any current. Okay. Okay, the output of the power supply is 22 volts DC. The pilot lamp doesn't seem to work. Alright, no pilot light. Okay, so let's push up the voltage to 150, let's say. There. Alright. The power supply is now delivering almost 29 volts DC, and we're at 151 volts. No pilot light though. Okay. So that's not so nice. Okay, well, let's get on with it. Let's push the voltage up to 180. There. Okay. Now the power supply is outputting almost 35 volts DC. Nothing is overheating. The output transistors are cold. The transformer is cold. So that's okay. No pilot light though. Alright, that's a shame. Alright, so now let's go to 220 or thereabouts. Okay, 225. There you go. 43.2 volts DC on the power supply. Alright, I'm going to play a royalty-free song which I downloaded from YouTube. And I'm using this particular song because it's full of very low, deep bass sounds and very high sounds as well. And it's apparently called Cutting It Close. So there you go. Maximum volume. So while the amplifier was working at full power, you could also notice that the DC voltage coming from the power supply dropped quite a bit, up to 3 volts or so, from the nominal voltage it is outputting right now. Okay, so do notice that the AC power going in is 222 volts AC, and at that voltage the output DC voltage is, well, I'd say around 42 volts, whereas the manual says it should be 43 volts. But let's have a look if I pump up to 225 volts or so. There. So at 225 volts, I do get 43 volts DC output. So yeah, um, depending on the amount of AC voltage going into the power supply and, well, the transformer and the power supply, the DC output voltage will vary a little bit. But when the amplifier is at full power, the voltage, the DC output voltage of the power supply will drop by 3 or maybe even 4 volts. Yeah? Does that have any consequence on the sound quality? Well, yes. I mean, at full blast, full output power, maximum volume, the sound quality is not as good. You can certainly hear a bit of distortion. So, yeah, it's never a good idea to play your amplifier at maximum volume. It always creates distortion on the output. The screws which are holding down the front panel and the nuts which are holding down the potentiometers to the front panel were all Loctited down, and I'm going to use Loctite again to secure them as they were originally. So yeah, there are quite a few screws to do, so here we go. No need to go overboard with the glue. A drop will do. I literally mean a single drop. Okay. I tightened all the screws before, and now that they are all tightened, I can secure them with some Loctite. There you go. The previous owner or owners of the amplifier made a crude attempt at putting like a small indication where the position of the button would be by scratching the paint of the button, which is unfortunate. And they did it on all the buttons. Okay, so it's really, yeah, it's sad that they damaged the nice finish of the buttons by doing that. Now I thought to sort of salvage the situation. I'd paint a little indicating, let's say, sign or symbol on the button with, and it's non-destructive. Okay, so I'm using red nail polish, and if you ask me why did I use red, well, the on-off switch also has red in it. Alright, I prepared the buttons for painting, and I used just some electrical tape to mask off the parts that I do not want to be covered in paint. And well, I say paint, but actually I'm going to use a kind of nail polish. Okay, so what I'm going to do is fill up the uncovered areas with 2 layers of nail polish, and that should do it. Alright, so after applying a little bit of heat to the corner, the plastic started to expand and flatten out. Yeah, and it looks a little bit better, but yeah, slightly so. But it's not perfect, not by any means. And I didn't dare heating it much longer or harder, because I was afraid the PVC would start to crumple or shrink or let go of the wood, in fact. So I heated it up, and then I pressed gently with the flat of this little screwdriver onto the slightly molten PVC and pushed it back into sort of, well, a flatter and better shape. And it worked out reasonably well, but I'm afraid I'll never get it back to its original shape unless I cover it all up with a fresh new layer of vinyl wrap, which I do not intend to do for this amplifier, because, okay, let's face it, it's not Sony's best or nicest amplifier, but it works perfectly well, and it's somewhat back to its original shape. So I think this repair will do perfectly. All in all, I replaced exactly 25 electrolytics in this little amplifier. Yeah, and you could say in total it took me maybe 2.5 hours to replace them all. So yeah, that is certainly a cost to take into account if you're going to refurbish this little amplifier. But all in all, it's not too complicated to work on this amplifier. So I would say for a beginning restorer, so somebody who has ambitions to go the same way that I went, this might be the perfect little vintage equipment to start with. It's not complicated. The layout of the components is really easy, except maybe for the preamp board. It's rugged. It's overall it's simple and not too expensive, either in parts or in work. So yeah, for anyone out there who has ambitions to restore vintage equipment, well, maybe this kind of little amplifier might be the right way to go. Alright, a final look at the Sony TA-70 amplifier. And I finally figured it out that it's actually 15 watt per channel output power and 30 watts in total, so not 30 watts per channel. But there you go. It's a cute little amplifier, but what can I say? It's okay for a teenager, you know, in a playroom or whatever. It's a rugged little amplifier, not too expensive. It does what it needs to do, but nothing more. I mean, this is certainly not an amplifier a hi-fi, high fidelity aficionado would buy. Okay, so this is good for a beginner, or as like I said, like a games amplifier maybe, or just a simple music installation or something like that. It's relatively cheap, it's rugged, it does what it needs to do, and that's said. That's it. Nothing more. Um, yeah, so there you go. Let's listen to it one final time before I put it away. And yeah, here we go. Thank you for watching.